Once upon a time in a small village called Umuroko, there lived a young man named Mazi. He shared a tiny, old hut with his mother, the same humble dwelling his father had left behind when he passed away. Mazi and his mother were poor. Each day, Mazi would journey to the marketplace to sell his handcrafted beads. Though the beads were beautiful, they brought little money, often not enough to properly feed himself and his mother. While Mazi's childhood friends had grown into wealthy men with grand houses, wives, and children, Mazi remained in poverty, still living in the tiny hut, and still alone. His friends, now busy with their prosperous lives, no longer visited him. Every morning, Mazi would don his worn clothes and walk to the market, hoping that someday his circumstances would improve. But day after day, nothing changed. Mazi remained poor, and his heart grew heavy with sadness. One bright morning, as Mazi walked to the market with a large basket of beads balanced on his head, he was lost in thought about how he might earn enough to feed his mother and himself. The road was dusty, and Mazi, distracted by his worries, failed to notice a large stone in his path. His foot struck the stone, and he tumbled to the ground. His basket flew from his head, scattering beads everywhere. Villagers nearby witnessed his fall, but instead of offering help, they began to laugh and point. "Look at him," one woman jeered, "still selling beads like a woman while all his peers have become rich. He's poor and wretched." Humiliation burned Mazi's face as he quickly gathered his beads. The more he collected, the louder the villagers laughed. Each cruel word felt like a stone weighing down his heart. When he finally replaced all the beads in his basket, he hung his head and continued to the market. The laughter and mockery played in his mind throughout the day. Even at his market stall, the embarrassment and sadness clung to him. He couldn't smile or speak to anyone. The sun set, but the darkness in Mazi's heart remained. Mazi struggled to make ends meet with his bead sales. When his earnings weren't enough to feed himself and his mother, he would borrow money from other villagers. One day, Mazi borrowed from his friend Ki, a man who prized money above all else and had little patience for debtors. Mazi promised to repay him within a few days, but when the time came, he couldn't gather enough money. Early one morning, before the marketplace had fully awakened, Ki stormed to Mazi's stall. "Mazi, where is my money? Pay me now," he shouted, his voice carrying through the entire market for all to hear. Mazi, who had just begun arranging his beads, saw Ki and knew he was in trouble. "Please give me more time," Mazi begged. "I promise I'll pay you soon." But Ki's anger was too great. He slapped Mazi hard across the face, the sound echoing through the market. The watching traders were shocked at the sight of Mazi's helplessness and pain. A few kind-hearted merchants approached and offered Mazi enough money to repay his debt. Though grateful, Mazi felt diminished and ashamed. After paying Ki, he sat quietly at his stall, his spirits crushed by the public humiliation. The day crawled by, and Mazi's heart grew heavier with sadness and frustration. He couldn't understand why life treated him so harshly. That evening, he returned home feeling more hopeless than ever before. Mazi had reached his breaking point. Tired of poverty and disrespect, he decided to visit his childhood friend Nidu, who had become wealthy and respected in the village. Mazi hoped Nidu might help him change his fortune. With nervous steps, Mazi approached Nidu's grand house and knocked on the door. When Nidu saw Mazi standing there in worn clothes and dusty shoes, he didn't even offer a handshake. "I don't want your poverty to rub off on me," Nidu said coldly. Swallowing his pride, Mazi explained why he had come. "Nidu, I want to be rich like you. I'm tired of being poor. Please help me." Nidu studied Mazi for a moment. "If you're truly ready to do anything, I can help you," he said gravely. "But remember, no one should ever know where your money comes from." A chill ran down Mazi's spine at these words, but desperation drove him forward. Nidu reached into his pocket, pulled out some money, and handed it to Mazi. "This is just the beginning," Nidu warned. "But be careful, Mazi. Once you start, there's no turning back." Taking the money with both excitement and fear, Mazi thanked Nidu and left, wondering what path he had just stepped onto. Mazi was overjoyed with Nidu's gift. He rushed to the market and purchased more food than he had ever bought before. That evening, He prepared a feast the likes of which he and his mother hadn't enjoyed in years. As they sat down to eat, his mother looked at the abundant food with surprise. "My son, where did you get the money for all this?" she asked. Not wanting to reveal the truth, Mazi lied. "The gods of our land have smiled on me, Mama," he said with a smile. "They have blessed me." His mother nodded slowly, her eyes showing concern. "Be careful, my son," she cautioned, but Mazi was too excited to heed her warning. A few days later, Mazi returned to Nidu's house, eager to learn what came next. Nidu took him to visit the chief priest, a man known for his mysterious powers. The priest examined Mazi with piercing eyes. "I see a bright future for you," he declared, "but you must be ready to do what it takes." "I'm ready," Mazi affirmed, determination overriding his fear. The priest instructed Mazi to bring 2 white cockerels for a ritual that would begin his journey to wealth. Mazi quickly acquired the birds and brought them to the priest, who performed a ceremony in the dead of night amid smoke and strange incantations. The next morning, Mazi woke to find 2 bundles of money beside his bed, just as the priest had promised. His heart raced with joy at the sight of more money than he had ever possessed. With gratitude to the gods, he began planning how to expand his business and transform his life. For the first time in ages, Mazi went to the market with a light heart, believing he was finally on the path to prosperity like his friend Nidu. Yet deep down, he sensed this was merely the beginning of something much larger and potentially more dangerous than he could imagine. Overjoyed with his newfound wealth, Mazi hurried back to the chief priest's shrine to share the good news. The priest was waiting for him, but instead of sharing Mazi's excitement, he fixed him with a solemn gaze. "This is only the beginning, Mazi," the priest said gravely. "If you want to become truly rich, there is one more sacrifice you must make." Mazi's heart missed a beat. He had expected something simple, but the priest's next words turned his excitement to terror. "You must bring me the heart of someone who shares your blood," the priest declared, his voice as cold as the night. Mazi's eyes widened in shock. "But I have no relatives, no brothers or sisters," he protested, desperately searching for an escape from this horrific demand. The priest's gaze remained unwavering. "You have your mother," he stated quietly, "the one who shares your blood. You have 3 days to decide, Mazi. If you do not bring the heart, you will either die or go mad. The choice is yours." Mazi's world crumbled around him. His mother was the only person who had ever truly cared for him, and now he was being asked to commit an unthinkable act. The priest's ultimatum echoed in his mind as he trudged home, his feet heavy with dread. 3 days. That was all he had to make the most difficult decision of his life. When he reached his small hut, he saw his mother waiting with a warm meal, her face full of love and concern. But Mazi couldn't meet her eyes, the weight of his choice pressing down like a massive stone. He knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Trapped in his impossible situation, Mazi was consumed by fear and confusion. The thought of harming his mother haunted him like a dark cloud, but the prospect of death or madness terrified him equally. That night, sleep eluded him. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with horrible thoughts. "How can I do this to my own mother?" he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. But the chief priest's warning continued to echo. "You have 3 days, Mazi. If you do not bring the heart, you will either die or go mad." During the day, Mazi tried to appear normal, but his inner turmoil was evident. His mother noticed his distress. "My son, you seem troubled. What is bothering you?" she asked gently. Unable to reveal the truth, Mazi shook his head. "It's nothing, Mama. I'm just tired." But it wasn't mere fatigue. It was the burden of an impossible choice. For 2 days, Mazi lived in profound fear and sadness. He barely ate and couldn't bring himself to smile. Time seemed to crawl as the chief priest's deadline loomed over him like a shadow. Mazi spent his time alone, wrestling with his choice, his life or his mother's. The thought of losing her tore at his soul, but the fear of his own demise or descent into madness was equally powerful. As the second day ended, Mazi felt trapped with no escape. He knew that whichever path he chose, there would be no return. The fear of what awaited him filled his heart, and he wished desperately that he could awaken from this nightmare. But the night was dark, and soon he would have to decide. The third day arrived, bringing with it a decision Mazi never thought he would make. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the village, Mazi's heart pounded in his chest. His hands trembled as he picked up the machete, his mind a tempest of fear, guilt, and desperation. Moving silently through their small hut, Mazi entered his mother's room. She slept peacefully, her face serene. Mazi stood frozen for a moment, his heart breaking at the sight. But the chief priest's words echoed in his mind. If you do not bring the heart, you will either die or go mad. With a heavy heart, Mazi raised the machete. Tears streamed down his face as he struck his mother, the woman who had always cared for him, who had always loved him. The room fell silent save for Mazi's sobs. He couldn't believe what he had done, but there was no going back. With trembling hands, he took his mother's heart and placed it in a calabash. Numb, as if trapped in a terrible dream, Mazi told himself, "This is what makes me a man. I had no choice." Carrying the calabash, Mazi ran to the chief priest's shrine, his clothes stained with his mother's blood, his heart pounding with fear and regret. He hoped that by completing the ritual, everything would end, that he would finally become rich and this nightmare would be over. But as Mazi reached the shrine, a deep dread settled in his chest. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, and he felt a cold emptiness inside. He had made his choice, but the cost was far greater than he had ever imagined. When Mazi arrived at the shrine, clutching the calabash that held his mother's heart, he stopped in his tracks. The chief priest lay motionless on the ground, his chest still, his eyes closed. The priest was dead. Mazi's heart plummeted into despair. He had killed his own mother, and now the only person who could complete the ritual was gone. All his hopes of wealth had crumbled to dust. He had committed the unthinkable for nothing. Falling to his knees before the shrine, the calabash still in his hands, Mazi broke down. Tears streamed down his face as the full horror of his actions washed over him. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice shaking with grief and regret. His cries echoed through the morning air, reaching the ears of nearby villagers. They rushed to the shrine to investigate and found a shocking scene. Mazi, covered in blood, kneeling hopelessly with a calabash before him. The villagers gasped in horror and disbelief. Some moved closer and peered into the calabash. When they saw what was inside, they recoiled in shock. The truth spread quickly through the crowd. "Mazi has killed his own mother," they whispered, the news traveling like wildfire until the entire village knew. Mazi, broken and devastated, could only sit in his sorrow, surrounded by the horrified whispers of the villagers. His life, once filled with hope for a better future, had become an inescapable nightmare. The weight of his actions crushed him, and he realized he had lost everything: his mother, his honor, and even his own soul. The villagers, filled with horror and anger at Mazi's deed, could not allow such an atrocity to go unpunished. They seized Mazi, too broken to resist, and dragged him to the village square to face the elders. The villagers shouted for justice as Mazi stood before the council of wise men, his head hanging low, his clothes still stained with blood, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Is it true that you have killed your own mother?" asked one elder, his voice deep and commanding. "Yes, it is true," Mazi whispered, barely audible. He then confessed everything: how his desire for wealth had consumed him, how the chief priest had promised riches in exchange for a terrible sacrifice, and how, in his desperation, he had taken his mother's life. As Mazi spoke, the villagers listened in stunned silence, their anger growing with each word. When he finished, the air was thick with tension. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. "He must be punished. He must pay for what he has done," they demanded, their fury mounting as they called for Mazi's death. The elders began to deliberate, knowing they must satisfy the people's thirst for justice while honoring their traditions and laws. During their deliberation, one elder leaned forward and asked, "Mazi, who led you to do such an evil thing? Who put this dark idea in your mind?" With tears in his eyes and a trembling voice, Mazi answered, "It was Nidu. He told me he could make me rich like him. He took me to the chief priest and said I had to do whatever it took to become wealthy." The villagers gasped in shock. Nidu was a respected man in the village, known for his wealth and power. But now they learned that his riches were built on terrible secrets. The elders immediately sent for Nidu, who was brought to the village square, his face pale and nervous. Nidu, is it true? The elders demanded. Did you lead Mazi down this dark path? Did you make him kill his own mother for wealth? Nidu hesitated, but seeing the angry faces surrounding him, he knew he couldn't lie. Yes, it is true, he confessed with a deep sigh. I showed Mazi the way to the chief priest, but I am not innocent myself. I used my first daughter for rituals to gain my wealth, and others have disappeared because of me. The villagers were furious. Some picked up stones, ready to exact immediate punishment. He deserves to die, they shouted. He has brought darkness into our village. But the elders, though equally angered, raised their hands to calm the crowd. No, one elder said firmly. We will not kill him, but he will pay for his crimes. The elders decreed that Nidu would be stripped of all his wealth. Everything he owned would be confiscated, and he would be banished from the village, never to return. His family would be forced to leave with him, living in shame with the knowledge that their prosperity had been built on innocent blood. The villagers watched as Nidu was led away in disgrace. His head hung low. His beautiful house, fine clothes, and treasures would all be taken, leaving him with nothing but the guilt of his terrible deeds. Nidu's downfall served as a harsh lesson for the village, a demonstration of how greed and the desire for wealth could lead to destruction. As Nidu and his family were driven out, the people were left to reflect on the cost of such dark ambitions. Even after Nidu's banishment, the villagers' anger toward Mazi remained unquenched. Many still demanded his death for the murder of his mother. But the wisest elder spoke up. Death would be too easy a punishment for Mazi, he declared. If we kill him, his suffering will end quickly. But what he did was so terrible that he should live with the weight of his actions for the rest of his life. The other elders agreed. They decided that Mazi, like Nidu, would be banished from the village. But instead of sending him to another community, they would exile him deep into the forest, where he would be alone with his pain and regret, with no comfort and no forgiveness. The villagers watched as Mazi was taken to the edge of the forest, his head bowed and his face filled with sorrow. He knew he would never see his village again, never feel the warmth of human companionship. He was alone, lost in the darkness that his greed had created. After Mazi's banishment, the villagers buried his mother with great respect. She was laid to rest with prayers and tears, and the people vowed never to forget what had happened. To prevent such a tragedy from recurring, the elders established a new law. Anyone wishing to consult the chief priest must first go through the king. The shrine would no longer be a place where people could seek wealth through dark means. With this new law in place, peace slowly returned to the village. Life resumed its normal rhythms. But the story of Mazi and his mother became a lesson that no one would forget. Parents told the tale to their children, and elders reminded the young of the dangers of greed and envy. Mazi's story became a warning. When you let greed consume your heart, it can destroy everything you hold dear, and in the end, the price of such greed is more than anyone can bear. The tale of Mazi teaches us that wealth gained through evil means brings only suffering and destruction. True prosperity comes from honest work, compassion, and community, not from sacrificing what is most precious for material gain.